Let's talk about something that hits deep: the return of Christ. I'm not here to sugarcoat anything or give you vague ideas. I want to challenge the way we're living, the way we're seeing the world, and the way we're ignoring things that might be staring us right in the face. Think about it: if Christ's return really is closer than we think, wouldn't we need to snap out of our routines and start looking at the bigger picture? Or are we too distracted to even notice what's happening? This is a question that's been debated for centuries. People have waited, speculated, and even predicted dates. But here's the thing: it's easy to dismiss those predictions because they've been wrong before. The bigger question isn't about the date, it's about the signs. And if we're being honest, the world today feels different. Something feels like it's accelerating. The chaos, the shifts in culture, the way technology is shaping everything, it's like all the pieces are falling into place faster than we ever imagined. Let's start with what's happening around us. The Bible gives a clear framework for what to expect before Christ's return. It talks about wars, famines, earthquakes, and nations clashing. Sure, you could argue that these things have always been around. But have they ever been this interconnected? Have they ever been this global? Wars aren't just happening in isolated regions anymore, they're affecting the entire world. The same goes for famines and natural disasters. They're not just random, isolated events, they're part of a bigger pattern. And it's impossible to ignore how everything feels more volatile. The question is, are we paying attention, or are we just brushing it all off as coincidence? One of the most striking signs is deception. The Bible warns that in the last days, deception will be everywhere.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
People will believe lies, abandon truth, and follow false teachers. Look at the world we live in today. Truth is no longer absolute, it's relative. Everyone has their version of it, and it's easier than ever to manipulate people into believing something that isn't real. Social media has amplified this to a level we've never seen before. Lies spread faster than truth, and people don't even question it anymore. Here's the thing: if we're living in a time where truth is so distorted, would we even recognize something real if it showed up? Would we know Christ's return if it happened? Or would we be so distracted by everything else that we'd miss it entirely? And then there's technology. This is where things get crazy. The Bible describes a global system where people won't be able to buy or sell without a specific mark. For centuries, that sounded like pure science fiction. But now, it's becoming reality. Digital currencies are already here. Biometric systems are being implemented everywhere. Governments and corporations are working on ways to centralize data and control systems in ways that were unimaginable just a few decades ago. What's scary is how quickly we're willing to give up our privacy and freedoms for convenience. Think about it: every time you use facial recognition, click accept on a terms of service agreement, or link your life to a digital ID, we're inching closer to a system that could control everything. Are we unintentionally building the very system the Bible warned us about? But this isn't just about technology or global systems. It's about the way humanity is changing. The Bible describes a time when people would become more self-centered, more obsessed with pleasure, and less focused on things that matter. That's not just a prediction, it's a description of the world we live in today. Our culture glorifies instant gratification. We're obsessed with fame, success, and material things. And what's worse, we've normalized it. The things that used to shock us don't even make us blink anymore. Morality has become subjective. What's right or wrong doesn't matter as long as it feels good. If Christ were to return today, would we even be ready for it? Or have we become so consumed by our own desires that we've forgotten what really matters? There's another layer to this, though something that feels even more personal. The Bible warns about a falling away from faith, a time when people will turn their backs on God. And that's exactly what we're seeing. Attendance at places of worship is declining. Fewer people believe in God or even think about spirituality. And those who do believe, many are lukewarm at best. It's not that faith has disappeared, it's that it's become something people put on the back burner. Something they'll think about later, but what if there is no later? What if we're running out of time? And here's something that really hits hard: the Bible doesn't just warn about the big global events. It talks about the personal, individual choices we make. It's not just about whether the world is ready for Christ's return, it's about whether we are. Are we living like we believe it could happen? Or are we just assuming we'll have more time? Because that's the scary part. Everyone assumes they'll have more time to get things right, more time to fix their mistakes, more time to focus on the things that matter. But what if time is exactly what we don't have? Let's not forget one of the most significant parts of the prophecy: the gospel will be preached to all nations before the end comes. For the first time in history, we're living in a world where that's possible. Technology has made it so that the message of Christ can reach the farthest corners of the earth. And it's happening right now. Missionaries are using tools like social media, streaming platforms, and satellite technology to spread the message in ways that were never possible before. If we're living in a time when the gospel is reaching the entire world, doesn't that mean we're closer to the end than ever before? But here's where I want to flip the script. This isn't just about fear or trying to scare anyone into thinking the end is near. It's about waking up to the reality of what's happening and asking the only question that really matters: what are we doing about it? If Christ really is coming back, and if his return could be closer than we think, how does that change the way we live? Are we just going to keep going through the motions? Or are we going to start living like it matters? Most of us live like tomorrow is guaranteed. We make plans for the future, assume everything will stay the same, and push off the hard questions for later. But if there's one thing the Bible makes clear, it's that Christ's return will come suddenly. No warnings, no second chances. And that's what makes it so urgent. If we're not ready now, we might not get another chance. So here's where it gets real. If Christ's return is closer than we think, what does that mean for us? What does it mean for the way we treat people, the way we spend our time, the way we prioritize what's important? Are we living in a way that reflects the urgency of what could be coming? Or are we just going to keep pretending like we have all the time in the world? The truth is, we don't know when Christ will return. It could be tomorrow, or it could be 1,000 years from now. But one thing is certain: the signs are all around us. The question isn't whether he's coming back, it's whether we're ready for it. And that's something only you can answer. So is Christ's return closer than we think? Or have we been ignoring the signs for far too long? Let's keep going deeper into this idea, because there's a lot more to unpack. Ready for part 2? Let's keep going, because this topic is way too important to skim over. We just scratched the surface earlier: what's happening in the world, how deception and technology are changing everything, and how humanity itself seems to be shifting in ways that align with biblical prophecy. But here's the thing: even if the signs are screaming at us, it doesn't matter unless we're paying attention. The real question is, why aren't we listening? Why do we keep ignoring what's right in front of us? Is it because we're too busy, too distracted, or maybe even too afraid to admit that this might all be real. Let's break this down further. One of the most sobering things the Bible says about the end times is that it will catch people off guard. Like a thief in the night. Think about that for a second. A thief doesn't send you a text saying, "Hey, I'll be breaking into your house tonight at 2 a.m. No, they come when you're least expecting it, when you're asleep, when your guard is down. That's exactly how Christ's return is described. And it's not because God is trying to trick us, it's because He's already given us everything we need to know. The signs are there, the warnings are clear. But most people, they're too distracted to notice. Think about how much noise there is in our lives. Social media, the news, endless entertainment, we're drowning in information, but none of it really matters. We're so busy scrolling, watching, and worrying about things that are temporary, we don't stop to think about the things that are eternal. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the chaos and distractions are part of the deception. If the enemy's goal is to keep us unprepared, what better way than to flood our lives with meaningless noise? And here's where it gets personal. If Christ's return is closer than we think, are we letting the noise drown out the call to get ready? Let's talk about the natural disasters we're seeing. Earthquakes, floods, wildfires, they're happening more frequently and with greater intensity. Scientists have all kinds of explanations for why this is happening: climate change, shifting tectonic plates, and so on. But what if there's more to it than that? The Bible describes natural disasters as birth pain signs that the world is groaning, that something big is coming. And just like birth pains, they're supposed to increase in frequency and intensity as the moment gets closer. Look at the patterns. Look at how it's all escalating. This isn't just about science or coincidence. It's part of a much bigger picture. And then there's the issue of wars and conflict. The Bible talks about nations rising against nations, kingdoms against kingdoms. That's not new, we've seen war throughout history. But there's a difference now. Wars today don't just affect the countries involved, they have global consequences. A conflict in one part of the world can trigger economic collapse, refugee crises, and political chaos everywhere else. We're so interconnected that a single spark can set the whole world on fire. And it's not just physical wars, it's cultural wars, ideological wars, spiritual wars. People are more divided than ever. Everywhere you look, there's tension, conflict, and division. It feels like the world is on the brink, and we're all just waiting for something to tip it over the edge. But here's what's even more alarming: the rise of false teachings and spiritual deception. The Bible warns that in the last days, many will be deceived. It says people will turn away from sound doctrine, chasing after teachings that make them feel good but aren't rooted in truth. Look at the spiritual landscape today. It's a buffet of beliefs. People mix and match ideas from different religions, philosophies, and self-help movements, creating their own version of truth. And the scary part? A lot of it sounds good. It's wrapped in positivity, self-love, and empowerment. But underneath it, there's no substance. It's hollow. And it pulls people further and further away from the truth. Even within Christianity, there's a shift happening. Some people are watering down the gospel to make it more palatable. They avoid talking about sin, repentance, or judgment because it's uncomfortable. But the truth is, Christ's return isn't about comfort. It's about accountability. It's about being ready, no matter how uncomfortable that might feel. So here's something to think about: if Christ came back today, would we even recognize him? Or would we be so caught up in our own version of faith that we'd miss him entirely? And let's not forget the spiritual apathy that's spreading. People aren't just turning away from faith, they're becoming indifferent to it. For so many, life is about surviving the day, paying the bills, and chasing happiness. God isn't even on their radar. And maybe that's the scariest part. It's not outright rebellion, it's just indifference. It's living like God doesn't matter, like eternity doesn't matter. But what if this indifference is exactly what the Bible warned about? The idea that people would become so consumed by their own lives that they'd completely miss the bigger picture. Now let's shift gears and look at something that's often overlooked: the condition of the church. The Bible warns about a falling away, an apostasy before the end. It says that many who profess faith will turn away, their love growing cold. And if we're being honest, we're seeing that unfold right now. Churches are closing, attendance is dropping, and even within the church there's division. People argue over politics, theology, and personal preferences, forgetting the mission they've been called to. If the church is supposed to be a light in the darkness, what happens when the light starts to flicker? What happens when the salt loses its flavor? But here's the hope in all of this: even though the signs are intense, they're also a reminder. They're a wake-up call. They're God's way of saying, I'm still here. I'm still in control. But time is running out, and that's what makes this so urgent. This isn't about predicting dates or living in fear. It's about recognizing the moment we're in and responding to it. So let's get real. If Christ's return is closer than we think, what are we doing about it? Are we just waiting for someone else to sound the alarm, or are we taking this seriously? This isn't about being perfect or having everything figured out. It's about being ready. It's about living with purpose, with urgency, and with faith that can't be shaken. And here's the bottom line: whether Christ returns tomorrow or 1,000 years from now, the signs are pointing to one undeniable truth: the world as we know it won't last forever. Something bigger is coming, and the choice we all have to make is whether we'll be ready for it or not. So here we are. We've talked about the signs, the chaos, the distractions, and how everything seems to be pointing to something bigger. But now we need to get practical. If Christ's return is closer than we think, what does that mean for you and me right here, right now? What does it actually mean to be ready? Because let's be real, it's one thing to talk about the world falling apart or the signs aligning, but it's another thing entirely to ask yourself, am I living in a way that matters? Let's start with what ready doesn't mean. It doesn't mean living in fear. It doesn't mean obsessing over every news headline or trying to predict exact dates. That's not the point. In fact, the Bible makes it clear that no one knows the day or the hour. So if anyone's out there claiming they've figured it out, they're already off track. But what we do know is that we're supposed to live like it could happen at any moment. That's not fear, that's urgency. That's the focus. And there's a huge difference between the two. The problem is, we don't like urgency. We like comfort. We like to think we have time. And that's the trap most of us fall into. We say things like, I'll get serious about my faith later. Or, I'll deal with those bad habits eventually. But what if there's no later? What if there's no eventually? That's why being ready isn't about perfection, it's about direction. It's about making small, consistent choices every single day to live for something bigger than yourself. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. Being ready means looking at your life honestly. No excuses, no justifications, just raw honesty. Are you living in a way that reflects what you believe, or are you just going through the motions? Because if you're not taking this seriously, then what's the point? The Bible talks about how, in the last days, people will be lukewarm, not fully committed, just kind of coasting. And honestly, that's a lot of us. We're not outright rejecting God, but we're not fully living for Him either. We're somewhere in the middle, and that's the most dangerous place to be. So let's break it down. What does being ready actually look like? First, it's about your relationship with God, not religion, not rituals, but a real personal connection. Are you spending time with Him? Are you seeking Him? Or is He just an afterthought in your busy life? Because here's the thing, when Christ returns, it's not going to be about how many church services you attended or how many Bible verses you memorized. It's going to be about whether you knew Him and whether He knew you. That's it. So if your relationship with God feels distant or shallow, now's the time to change that. Second, being ready means dealing with the stuff in your life that's holding you back. The Bible talks about throwing off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. We all have stuff like that, right? Maybe it's an addiction, a toxic relationship, bitterness, pride, or just apathy. Whatever it is, it's time to stop ignoring it. Because here's the truth, the longer you hold on to it, the heavier it becomes. And if Christ's return is close, why waste another second carrying something that's only weighing you down? But let's not stop there. Being ready also means looking outward. It's not just about your relationship with God, it's about how you treat the people around you. Are you loving others the way Christ loved us? Are you forgiving, serving, and showing kindness even when it's hard? Because the Bible makes it clear that when Christ returns, He's not just going to look at what we believed, He's going to look at how we lived. Did we use our time, our resources, and our influence to make a difference? Or did we just live for ourselves? And this is where it gets real. If Christ's return is closer than we think, then every single thing we do matters. The way we spend our time, the way we use our money, the way we speak to people, the choices we make when no one's watching. It all counts. So the question is, are we living in a way that reflects that? Or are we wasting our lives on things that won't matter in the end? Now let's talk about the bigger picture. Being ready isn't just about your personal life, it's about your role in the world. The Bible says that the gospel will be preached to all nations before the end comes. And here's the crazy part, we're living in a time when that's actually possible. Technology has made it so that the message of Christ can reach the farthest corners of the earth. But it's not just about technology, it's about you. Are you sharing your faith? Are you using your voice to point people to Christ? Or are you staying silent because it's uncomfortable? And here's where it hits hard if you believe Christ's return is close, and you're not telling anyone about it. What does that say? If we really believe this is real, then how can we stay quiet? How can we sit back and watch people we care about live without hope, without truth, without knowing what's coming? It's not about being preachy or judgmental, it's about love. It's about caring enough to say, hey, I don't have all the answers, but I know there's something bigger going on, and I want you to be ready too. But let's be honest, this isn't easy. Living like Christ's return is close means going against the grain. It means standing out in a world that's obsessed with comfort, success, and self-gratification. It means making choices that won't always be popular or easy. But isn't that the point? If the world is heading in one direction, and the Bible is pointing us in another, then maybe the harder path is the right one. And here's the thing, being ready doesn't mean living in fear of Christ's return. It means living with hope. The return of Christ isn't just about judgment, it's about restoration. It's about the promise that everything broken will be made new, that every injustice will be made right, and that every tear will be wiped away. So if we really believe that, shouldn't it change the way we live? Shouldn't it fill us with urgency, but also with joy and anticipation? So here's the bottom line: if Christ's return is closer than we think, then nothing else matters more than being ready. Not your job, not your bank account, not your social status. The only thing that will matter in the end is whether you lived for what's eternal or wasted your life on what's temporary. And that's a choice we all have to make every single day. So where do we go from here? This isn't just about what's happening in the world or what the Bible says about the future. It's about you. It's about me. It's about whether we're willing to wake up, let go of the distractions, and start living like the clock is ticking. Because whether Christ returns tomorrow or 1,000 years from now, one thing is certain: we don't have forever. And the only question that really matters is, are we ready?